Hello, folks. Welcome back. This is Chris in Central Pennsylvania. My guest once again is Dr. Corne Mulder, now the leader of the Freedom Front Plus, one of the important political parties there in South Africa. Dr. Mulder, I would greet you in Afrikaans, but I know that you speak German, so I'll say Servus, wie geht's es Ihnen?
Sehr gut, danke schön. No, thank you very much, Chris. It's good to see you again. Thank you for the opportunity.
It's a pleasure, and thanks for responding so quickly. I mean, I know you're very busy. You're not just the longest serving member of parliament. Now you're also the leader of the Freedom Front Plus, and I'm sure that comes a lot more responsibility and eats up a lot more of your day.
Unfortunately, yes, but it's quite exciting, and that's why I like politics. Things change from day to day depending on the next news bulletin, and that makes it exciting.
Well, speaking of exciting, in East London, just a short while ago, the leader of the Economic Freedom Fighters, the political party that likes to wear prison jumpsuits to Parliament and dance around like a bunch of fools, the leader, Julius Malema, was convicted previously. He was sentenced a short while ago on these felony convictions and given a 5-year prison sentence. He was not given the right to appeal his conviction, but he was given the right to leave to appeal the sentencing. But as it stands, with a 5-year conviction, he will be banned from Parliament. And then he will have to wait, I believe, 5 years after the completion of his sentence. So we would see that Julius Malema won't be in Parliament for at least a decade if this pans out. Did you watch the verdict, and what are your reactions as leader of the Freedom Front Plus?
Oh, I did watch the whole court proceedings today and yesterday, and I had to make sure that I see exactly what was going on there. And one must remember, this comes from a long time ago. These things happened in 2018 already. It's now 8 years later, and we only now had a verdict and a sentence. So it's a very slow process. But I think there's a lot of acceptance in terms of the fact that at last we see justice in terms of the conviction and then the sentence. And as you correctly point out, in terms of the Constitution in Section 47(1)(e), that if he does not succeed with his appeal, he'll be out of Parliament immediately for the period of his sentence, and then for a further 5 years extension after that. And that's what the Constitution clearly says. And that's because he was sentenced directly to jail without the option of the fine in terms of count one.
Well, that's a pretty exciting thing, I think, for a lot of people who don't like Malema, is he doesn't have the fine, which means he doesn't have many options here. Unless the court is captured, I can't see a basis for appeal. This magistrate was lockstep explaining all this and was very deliberate in going through the process, and basically said that Malema took South Africans for fools with his toy gun approach. And also, the one argument that carries no water is that it was just, spontaneous. Really, you had a 9mm, you fired 15 rounds, then you got a rifle and fired a further 7 rounds. I don't see any spontaneity. I mean, if it was spontaneity, he might have fired a round in the air, but even that seems implausible. This whole thing was a joke from the standpoint of the South African people having to deal with this since 2018. He's committed so many other egregious offenses. He's incited violence with what was once considered by the High Court to be hate speech, the Kill the Boer song, but then recently the court refused to hear that case, and now he can sing it at will. And we've seen people scrawl "Kill the Boer" in the blood of their victims in farmhouses. I think this is just desserts. I was surprised, Dr. Mulder, that the prosecutor pushed hard for a 15-year sentence, but I kind of expected, after seeing that, we might see a 3 to 5 year jail term. A lot of people didn't think it was going to happen, but here we have it, a jail term. Any thoughts on the state and its pursuit of this case?
No, I welcome it, obviously, because Mr. Malema has been controversial all along. That is his style. And there's been numerous occasions where people felt that the state should have acted against him for various things, and it didn't happen. This was now the first time, after a lot of pressure was applied to continue with the conviction or to the trial and to have him charged. And in the end, the prosecutor did a very good job, and they did ask for 15 years. But as you correctly point out, the magistrate did it very precisely and didn't make sure that she didn't make any mistakes, because she knew this is going to be a high profile and everybody will be watching, and she doesn't want to be seen as to have failed.
Well, it's not just this case of dangerously, recklessly firing a live firearm in the air. We also many other instances of the Kill the Boer singing. Additionally, we have him assaulting a lieutenant colonel in the South African Police Service at a funeral service, Winnie Mandela's funeral. And we've also got the Vendebank scandal, which is still, I think, the only convicted person in that scandal has been a white banker who actually got himself convicted. But it's so many things with him. But let's shift attention from Malema. He needs to talk to his attorneys now. He's got a lot to work on his appeal. So we'll give him a few hours to work on that. But I'm going to quote, not verbatim, but quote someone who was on Newsroom Africa. He had a guest on there, Jordan Hill Lewis, and the journalist or the commentator said, "I'm going to force this question. Is it fair to ask, is the DA tiptoeing around telling the Americans to keep their noses, not poke their noses into South Africa's business?" And of course, this was a question presented to the new leader of the Democratic Alliance, Jordan Hill Lewis, the mayor of Cape Town, by a presenter there, basically saying that America is poking its nose in South Africa's business. Now, I take exception to that personally. Of course, I'm an American, so I have skin in the game here. You're not an American, so you don't have skin. So I want to ask your opinion, but I don't see America poking its nose in South Africa's business. I see America deciding it won't provide aid to a country that abandons its constitution with unconstitutional law, expropriation without compensation, which led to the suspension of aid. It wasn't the white genocide, red herring that the leftists want to put out there all the time. It was actually the abrogation of the rule of law. And the other things, the U.S. has not stuck its nose, and we just said, if you want to do business with us, these are the conditions we think you should adhere to if we're going to be trading partners. Now, Dr. Mulder, you came to the States as a member of the GNU last year, representing your party, and you met with U.S. officials who gave the list of asks from the U.S. government. As I understand it, you can correct me if I'm wrong on this, you went back and asked for an office call. You weren't leader of the party at the time, I believe. You correct me on that too if I'm wrong. But you went back and asked for, as a member of the GNU, with an office call with the president of the Republic, and he rebuffed you and did want to hear what the Americans had to say. I mean, what if I got wrong there? It doesn't sound like the government of South Africa wants to address this issue with the United States.
You're absolutely right. Let me start off by saying, as you would have noticed, Mr. Jordan Hill Lewis was elected leader of the Democratic Alliance last Sunday, so he's very new in his job. And then he was in that situation where he was asked that question. I think he made a huge mistake by doing that. He should have corrected the interview and say, no, you're factually wrong. And he also referred to Mr. Elon Musk and the United States in terms, and the question specifically referred to the leadership of the current administration, not only Mr. Trump himself. And then he should have corrected the interview by saying it's not about poking the noses into South Africa's internal affairs. Those entities, be that the United States government or individual companies, are legitimate in saying, before we invest or before we give any aid to South Africa, we have certain concerns. And those concerns should be addressed. If you don't want to address them, don't expect us to trade or to invest in South Africa. But he didn't do that. He wanted to do the populist thing. And he was eager to oblige in terms of the questioning. And then he said he find the Trump administration imprehensible. Now, I think that is a vast mistake. It is also correct that the Democratic Alliance, I think, is going to try and get as many votes from the ANC and focusing on the black society in that instance. And it could be that they may find it quite acceptable to them. But I can assure you that is not something that we would ever support at all. On the contrary.
Well, and along those lines, Dr. Mulder, is there a couple of things here? Let me ask quickly, and then do you think this was intentional to go to that base to try to get more Black South African voters because it might be popular, or do you think it was a youthful indiscretion? I mean, he's 39. I cringe at saying someone at 39 is young, or because I'm not 39 anymore. But maybe it was a youthful indiscretion or a youthful mistake by a relatively young politician. Am I being too generous?
You're way too generous. It's not about being youthful. He's an experienced person. He's the mayor of Cape Town. He was a member of parliament for a while. What he expressed is the positioning and the feeling of the Democratic Alliance under his leadership. And that's his choice. The Democratic Alliance has said quite clearly at their conference on Sunday that they want to become the largest party in South Africa. There's nothing wrong with that, and I accept that, and they can do that. But it's not nothing new. They've been trying to do that since 1994. But he knows in order to do that, he needs to position the party where he's now currently positioning the party, and that's their decision and that's their choice. I think it's a failure. It's a mistake. If we are serious and we need investment and we need to get employment going and we need to get the economy growing, then this is not the right way to do it. And my response was he should go and explain that to every unemployed South African, that he is basically rebuffing the United States and aid and trade from that in that regard. As you correctly point out, when I was in the United States and during the discussions we had with officials in the White House, they did indicate those different non-tariff issues, the 5 of them. And I did come back and I did try to get an appointment with the president. I was rebuffed at the time. Luckily, exactly about a month ago, I did have a meeting with President Ramaphosa, a one-on-one meeting just between the two of us. It was a 90-minute meeting, and it went quite well. We could address a number of issues, but the talking is one part. The action will determine whether there was any success in terms of being heard or not.
Well, it's interesting, Dr. Mulder, because it seems to beggar the imagination why someone would want to have poor trade relations with the United States. Of course, they can blame it on Trump reciprocal tariffs, but Trump didn't put 70% tariffs on our poultry imports to South Africa. Trump didn't ban our pork from going into South Africa. Trump didn't put quotas on our automobiles and technological resources while Chinese cars poured into the country unconstrained. It wasn't Trump that did that. It was the ANC that did those things. But the whole thing that gets me, that beggars imagination, Dr. Mulder, is that first off, we'll see analysts, especially pretend analysts in the media. I call them pretend because they really don't know anything about macroeconomics. Talk about the United States as the third largest trading partner, or say that the United States recently became the second largest. Well, that's poppycock. For a century, the United States was South Africa's largest trading partner. That was only surpassed by China about 15 years ago, but only because of the massive import of commodities that came from China and then reciprocally sending back finished products. And the thing is that we'll hear that the U.S. is the third largest, but they say the EU is the second. But the EU is not a country. The EU doesn't trade as a country. It trades independently as France and well, no longer the UK, but Denmark and Germany and such. So the U.S. has a trade deficit of about $8.7 billion to South Africa's advantage for beneficiation products that move up the entire value chain. Automobiles, the steel produced in South Africa, the parts produced in South Africa, the automobiles assembled there and then shipped to the United States. Not simply shipping coal from Richards Bay to China in a commodity, the price that swings wildly up and down. So it seems bizarre beyond belief to me that South Africa's government would not want to encourage this trade relationship where it's incredibly beneficial and hundreds of thousands of South African jobs are dependent on it. I'm still shaking my head about this approach.
It's all about the ideological positioning of the ANC. That's all that is about this. The ANC has positioned themselves with many rogue countries and rogue states throughout the world. I've said on numerous occasions that they have built their international relations policy on loyalty in terms of friendly nations or organizations that supported them during the armed struggle. But that is more than 30 years ago. And once you become the government, you should act in the best interest of the country. And it's in the best interest of the country that you trade with who you are being able to do exactly what needs to be done. But after South Africa became so entrenched into the BRICS organization and the whole focus to the East, they have turned their backs basically to the United States and to the Western civilization and the Western world in that instance. And we are paying the price. And that's the wrong way to go.
Well, you talked a few moments ago about the Democratic Alliance and Jordan Hill Lewis now taking over, becoming the leader of the party. The Democratic Alliance aspires to be the largest political party in South Africa. But the reality is that the DA reached its zenith in 2014 under Helen Zille, when it reached 4,004,000 aggregate votes. Since then, in successive elections, it's shedded voters like viral particles. In the 2019 election, when they tried to pretend they were the ANC light under Musi Maimane, they dropped to 3.6 million voters. And in the most recent national elections, they dropped to 3.5 million under John Steenhuisen. And of course, you may know him. He's your white agriculture minister.
Oh, yes, he was introduced like that and he paid the price. One should understand he was not going to retire or move out as the leader of the Democratic Alliance. He was absolutely committed to be re-elected, and that was the stance. In the end, he was pushed basically to let go of that position, and he decided to remain what he thinks is his best option as Minister of Agriculture, and that's another debate. But one must also understand that the Democratic Alliance, even at this stage, have less seats in Parliament than the National Party had at the beginning in 1994. So it's in terms of positioning, let the Democratic Alliance position themselves where they are. Luckily, the ANC is declining throughout, and I don't see that being turned around. And we are moving into the era of coalition governments. We will see that on local government at the end of the year in most likely most of the metros, if not all the metros, as well as in many councils throughout South Africa. And then one can play the role that we've been playing in very large councils and in some of the metros, and we'll take it further from there.
Well, by-elections aren't necessarily a good indicator of national sentiment because they're local and also tend to have very low turnout. But by-elections are going very poorly for the Democratic Alliance and for the ANC as well, except in their bastions of strength in places like the Eastern Cape or in Mpumalanga. But I'm seeing from by-elections that the IFP has been snatching a lot of seats from the ANC in KZN. The MK surprisingly actually has taken a few seats outside of KZN. Not that they're particularly strong, but we also see the Patriotic Alliance is eating the Democratic Alliance's lunch in the Western Cape. The DA had 57% in the last municipal elections in the city of Cape Town, their lowest performance in a long time. There's a real possibility that they could lose control, outright control of Cape Town, especially with that. Now, my question is that sets the stage for the Freedom Front Plus. Now, your party has been a relatively small party for a long time. You've had occasion where you've soared up by taking a lot of vote from the Democratic Alliance. Is that something that's happening now? Because I've got to be honest with you. I realize that many of my viewers are very much not. I used to have a lot of Democratic Alliance voters, but so many of them abandoned the DA. And I don't know that that's an accurate reflection of the DA's support base, particularly if you watch their made-for-television federal Congress. It's the sycophants dancing and ululating and it was quite exciting if you're a DA member. But are you seeing any movement of DA members towards your party or towards the Patriotic Alliance anywhere in the Western Cape or elsewhere?
Everywhere. It's happening in large numbers at the moment. Many people are leaving the Democratic Alliance for various reasons, and that was even the case before Hill Lewis became the leader of the party and is now positioning the party the way he's doing. In the last couple of months, since the last election, well, let's say for the last 12 months at least, we've been inundated with people joining our party, and the vast majority, we keep track of that, about 56% of our new people that join are coming from the Democratic Alliance. And then separate to that, we also get suddenly support and a lot of new applications from people from other communities. So the Democratic Alliance are losing support to various parties, to us in the one instance, but also to the Patriotic Alliance. And that's just the reality of what's happening. There's a realignment happening at the moment, and we will benefit from that.
Well, that realignment's interesting. You know, of course, I've talked to Dr. Groenewald repeatedly when he was leading the party. And one of the things I asked about, I guess kind of cheekily, I suggested a few years ago, I'm not in your party, but I suggested that the Freedom Front Plus, because of its conservative values, which match most South Africans, ironically, people don't see that. But your conservative values, at least what you state publicly, are things that most people believe in and should get behind if they only knew about that. And I suggested greater outreach to Black communities and colored communities. Is that happening now by default, or is your party making an effort to gain those voters?
Both. It's exactly happening at the moment by default, but also it is part of a strategy, and our campaign will do exactly the same. I believe there's a huge gap in our political spectrum between the socialism and that kind of failed policies from the ANC, as well as the liberal policies from the Democratic Alliance. And I've said right from the beginning, I am busy positioning the Freedom Front Plus as a party just right of center, being based on Christian conservative values, those successful values that have had all the success throughout the history of the world, if I may put it that way, and where Western civilization is basically successfully built upon. And those are the same kind of values, as you correctly point out, that the vast majority of South Africans from all communities are supporting. So we are moving into that, and that will be our approach and what we put on the table.
Well, we don't hear much these days publicly from Dr. Groenewald. He accepted the poison chalice of the corrections minister position, but by all accounts that we do hear, he seems to be doing quite well with it despite the lack of resources. But there's been a lot of social media chatter that Black South Africans think that Dr. Groenewald would be a good president for South Africa, and a little bit of, is that real, or is that just some sort of social media campaign? I mean, look, I think that Dr. Groenewald would be a fantastic president for South Africa, but is this just real, or are people actually just playing games in social media?
I don't think they are playing games. I think there's a huge feeling from South Africans out there, and why are they putting that kind of trust and that kind of support? And it's not only in Dr. Groenewald, it's in the party itself, because as you know, we don't have a direct presidential system or where you vote for a candidate, you vote for a political party. So people who want to support those ideas will have to vote for the party itself. And I think the basic reason is the projection of two things. The one is where we position ourselves in terms of Christian conservative values as a party. But secondly, people are desperate for discipline, for law and order, for those kind of things. And the party positions itself there. Dr. Groenewald positions himself also in those kind of positioning. And I think the support is coming from that. So it's not only a social media campaign, it's real. And we see that in the new applications for membership and new branches being formed.
Well, Dr. Mulder, one thing that I've noticed very recently after Elon Musk posted on Twitter or X, whatever he likes to call it these days, he complained about the BEE and the requirement to divest 30% of his hard-earned equity to someone who has no sweat equity and brings nothing to the table and shouldn't be there, but simply on the basis of skin pigmentation, which quite frankly is the very definition of racism, giving advantage or disadvantage based on skin color. It's repulsive and immoral. Okay, that's a political commentary on my part, but he's posted this, and I've been railing against this, and I've been, standing in the wind almost as a lone reed on this side of the Atlantic for years about what's going on with this legislation. But I have noticed that since he did that a few days ago, a lot of larger social media accounts on Twitter and on YouTube, American accounts I'm talking about specifically, have been running stories about racism in South Africa and the persecution of racial minorities. And while many of them have no idea what they're talking about, and it kind of irritates me, nonetheless, the topic is getting attention. It's getting daylight. Are you seeing this as well? Are you seeing any indication that folks, at least in America, are paying more attention to what's happening in South Africa?
Definitely, that they are paying more attention, and that I welcome on the one hand. On the other hand, in South Africa, the whole idea of these race-based policies are under huge pressure at the moment. The whole idea of black economic empowerment, the fact that the president is talking about this continuously, is just an indication of the fact that there's a lot of pressure being applied internally, but also from abroad on these policies, which have failed. They have clearly failed. If they were successful, why would we have this decimal terrible economic growth rate? Why would we have this unimaginable unemployment rate? Because those economic policies didn't succeed. They did not bring broad-based economic empowerment for the black community. They enriched a small elite. And that's the failure, all under the pretense of empowering the poor. That didn't happen. It's been an elitist kind of approach, and that's why it's failing.
Well, I think it's fair to say that a significant portion of your support base for the Freedom Front Plus is rural and agricultural. I imagine that many of your constituents are devastated by the anemic, pathetic, slow response to foot and mouth disease, something that has broke out several years ago. And I think part of the problem here, Dr. Muller, and you can, again, if you don't think I'm correct, please correct me, is the state intrusion into the private sector, the state not allowing people to vaccinate their cattle. I mean, that's absolutely insane. This whole process, and then of course your white Minister of Agriculture there, he ignored this issue when he came in office for a long period of time. I gave him an opportunity last year in April and May to come on when it still wasn't a major topic in the press. Most people didn't know about it, to ask him if there was a plan and what the plan was going to be. And he offered to come on and then didn't show up several times, as he's always done to me. But my issue here, not that my feelings are hurt, but so with this foot and mouth disease, which has not been in the press for the past couple weeks, but it hasn't gone away. I mean, this has been absolutely devastating in South Africa's ranchers and farmers. Is this having a major impact on your voting base, and is it making your party a stronger party as a result of the misery these people are suffering?
Oh, for sure. It's a tragedy, the fact that that's been happening in our agricultural sector, but it's a complete failure from the state, and the minister didn't make anything positive to make it better. And it's just part of the approach from government. I'm not aware of anything that government has attempted that was a success, or where they did this better than the private sector or individuals could have done that. And that's what the agricultural unions have been saying all along to the government and to the department and to the minister. But they are bent on the idea of state control, etc., and we pay the price. So in practice, at the moment, I think the Democratic Alliance in that situation has lost very strongly so the support of the agricultural community. And we are obviously having the good relations and good support coming from there.
Well, in fact, what we've seen, and not to turn this into a personal attack on the Minister of Agriculture, but what we have seen out of that ministry is personal attacks on Theo de Jager, an honorable man who's been, Soviet-esque wiped out of photographs on an agricultural trip to Berlin. He was just, in the photo, then photoshopped out. I mean, that sort of Soviet behavior is very alarming, and the public abuse that he received at the hands of the Minister of Agriculture for the Minister of Agriculture's failures was disappointing, to say the least.
Absolutely, it was very unfortunate. Theo de Jager is a very well-respected person in the agricultural sector in South Africa, and his organization, SAI, the Southern African process that he's busy there with, has got huge support, and he's being very well respected. He accompanied me when I visited the United States the first time around. And I think it was very unfortunate. It was a kind of a personal kind of thing, which he didn't ask for, but he was, as you correctly pointed out, he just disappeared from the photograph. Amazing, magic.
Yeah, I think the last time I saw that was photographs of Soviet leaders in the 1930s. That was a bit surprising.
Yeah,
I have the original photos. I have the digital proof, just in case anybody's curious about that. But
sure.
we saw this week that finally South Africa's president has announced an ambassador to the United States of America. Now, some people are saying, well, I haven't heard the term yet, but they're kind of grousing about old wine in new bottles. And so the question here is, look, I'm not surprised by the pick. As I said, I use Rumsfeld's quote, "The known knowns, the unknown unknowns." But Rolf Meyer is a known known. He may not be drinking buddies with Cyril Ramaphosa, but they know each other. He's also 78, doesn't have any political ambitions, and oftentimes the ANC will send ambassadors out to pasture with the ambassadorial appointment. But I was disappointed. I thought a smarter move would have been someone like Tony Leon, just for example, would be a good choice from the Democratic Alliance. He's been an ambassador to Argentina, and he knows how the game is played, and I don't think he did any harm. So I want to get your take on and your thoughts on Rolf Meyer, because as I've stated, this is a bit odd if he was trying to express to the United States his concern about what's happening in South Africa, because much of the Afrikaans-speaking community in South Africa thinks of Rolf Meyer as a traitor, as a Ferreira. They don't trust him at all. And if you were talking about, you were concerned about the issues the U.S. has brought forward with property rights and minority rights, this really is more of the same from the ANC. But I will say this before you respond, is that I expect Rolf Meyer to just be there and probably not do anything controversial. He's smart enough to do that. And I think the real meat of the relationship with the United States and with Pretoria will take place in Hatfield with Ambassador Bozell there. Any thoughts on Rolf Meyer?
Yes. Well, this is a mouthful, if I may put it this way. There's a long history, unfortunately, and there's a huge trust deficit. Now, what complicates this whole thing is the following. When President Trump issued the first executive order in January of last year, as part of that executive order, he basically directed it also dealing with the Afrikaner and the Afrikaner issue. So that became a reality. During my visit in Washington, we were given those those five issues from the United States, and some of them deal with the Afrikaner issue. Um, so now the president has appointed someone who is technically also an Afrikaner, and that plays into that reality. But the problem is this: there's a trust deficit, and let me just try to explain that. Um, Rolf Meyer was the chief negotiator of the National Party and the government during the transition in 1994, negotiating at CODESA on behalf of government. And at that stage, the National Party government had the support of the vast majority of Afrikaners and white people in South Africa. He was supposed to look after their interests in that negotiating process. There's a famous video that there was an interview done with Cyril Ramaphosa at the last night of CODESA, in which Cyril says there was a party and everybody was enjoying themselves and dancing. And I was looking at Rolf Meyer and he was dancing and enjoying himself. And then Cyril says, I was wondering if I was him, if I would have been that happy if I cave in the way that they did in terms of everything that was important to them. But it became worse because what the National Party at the time had in mind, and Rolf Meyer was supposed to do that, was to deliver some kind of power sharing. We ended up with a simple black majority government. But the worst part came that a couple of years later, then Meyer joined the ANC, became an ANC member, and he's been an ANC member for more than 20 years now. So we are dealing basically with cadre deployment by sending him there. I sometimes use the example, and I know some of the younger viewers will not remember these individuals, but I sometimes use the example to say, way back in Northern Ireland, there was a conflict and there was an organization called Sinn Féin, and the leader was Gerry Adams. The equivalent would have been if Gerry Adams joined the Tory party in London, or if Yasser Arafat or the PLO joined Likud. In modern day times, it would be the same if Benjamin Netanyahu now joins Hamas. And then you say, you need to trust him, he's a very good person. Let's see where this goes. I don't know. Mr. Ramaphosa indicated he wants to get the relationship between our two, the United States and South Africa, back to a good relationship. And it will depend. If Rolf Meyer first needs to address the trust deficit with the Afrikaner people, because there's no way that he can go to Washington and speak on behalf of the ANC and speak on behalf of Ramaphosa and think they are going to solve the outstanding Afrikaner non-tariff issues. It's not going to happen.
Well, the ANC may have to, by default, improve relations with the United States. All its friends are disappearing. Cuba, Iran, Russia's on its knees. So
Yes,
they may have to turn
not
to
doing that.
Americans
They're
just
not
out of
doing
necessity.
so.
Well, we've covered quite a bit here, but I do want to see if I can get a promise from you before we part. I have a couple more questions. Famously, repeatedly in the last election cycles for municipal elections and then national elections, the Democratic Alliance repeatedly told people not to vote for smaller parties because it would split the vote and it would keep the ANC in power. Of course, that was untrue. And as I predicted, I'm going to boast a little bit here in November of 2021, after municipal elections, looking at the election data and what I projected. Now, the truth changed. Events came and went. The formation of the MK party sometimes went up and down. But I predicted the ANC would come in at 38 to 42%. They came in at 40%. So I was right. The DA was wrong. But my point here to you, Dr. Mulder, is will you make a promise that when if the DA becomes a small party, you're not going to tell people not to vote for it?
Yes, yes, I won't do that because I honestly believe that you can't waste your vote. You can only waste your vote if you vote for a party that does not carry your values. Then you are wasting your vote. And if people vote for any party because they think they've got a better choice and they don't vote for the values that they support, they are wasting their vote. No, we won't do that. And we are going to see a fascinating situation at the end of the year. We're going to have coalitions, and the Freedom Front Plus will continue to play the role of the adult in the room and try to bring stability and direction in terms of where we need to go.
Well, in fact, the municipal elections are coming up later this year, and I think that this is kind of my thoughts on the trend. If you want to weigh in, you're welcome to. I see the ANC losing more support, losing control of metros. I see the DA declining and potentially, possibly even losing Cape Town, as I said. They're at 57% 5 years ago. So we'll see where they're at there. But they lost a number of municipalities in the last election. I think they're going to lose more. And then I also see the IFP gaining a little bit in KZN. I'm not sure about MK in the municipal elections. We'll see how it goes. But I also see the Patriot Alliance having a big surge and potentially the Freedom Front Plus having a surge. That would probably make the two of you potential kingmakers in some of these municipalities.
Your analysis is spot on. That's exactly what's going to happen. The IFP is growing at the moment, and one of the reasons for that is I believe the previous leader of the IFP was trying to create the IFP as a more broad-based kind of political party, while it seems that the current leadership is basically focusing on their traditional base, and that is very paying very well for their effort in that instance. The other parties, your analysis is absolutely spot on. And even Cape Town, we don't know, but that 57% that they had the last time may not be enough this time. And it puts the Patriotic Alliance and the Freedom Front Plus in very strong positions to play exactly that role. And we are prepared to do so. I'm in contact with party leaders from time to time.
Well, in the upcoming elections, there's not been a lot of public talk about it. We don't see much in the press, and obviously, it's not time for the posters and T-shirts to come out yet. But your party, Freedom Front Plus, are you active at grassroots level, drumming up support right now, and not to peek under the tent, but will there be a theme? I hate the term manifesto. That's very communist sounding, but it is in the vernacular in South Africa. But will that be forthcoming? And when might we expect to see where the Freedom Front Plus stands and its positions for the local elections?
Yes, we are in that process. At the moment, we are quite active on local level. We have all kinds of outreaches throughout. Interesting, there's a by-election next week on the West Coast in a very strong DA stronghold, one of the strongest strongholds, where we are also participating. I'm looking forward to see what comes out of that and if the current developments have any influence on the result in that by-election, and we'll focus on that and see. But we plan at this stage, the beginning of September. We expect the election at the beginning of November. So we are in the process of identifying candidates and preparing everything in that to be ready. And we are also in the process of positioning the party, being seen as the adult in the room, being the stable party that brings progress, that has answers, has solutions, etc. And we'll put that on the table, but it will be basically being with the positioning of the party as a conservative Christian party that believes in law, order, stability, and who wants to create a future for all South Africans and bring prosperity and take South Africa where we should be, away from the failed ideologically driven socialist policies and liberal policies we've seen the last couple of years from both the DA and the ANC.
Well, one of the challenges with South Africa, of course, in the last election, the DA crowed that they were the only party that gained, but in reality, they lost 100,000 voters. But they were going by percentages. But the reason they got higher percentages is because the ANC shed so many voters. They're down 8.5 million votes. And if the problem here is with 43 million plus eligible voters, just a fraction of those people actually vote. Is the Freedom Front Plus looking at potentially people who may have voted in the past or who've never voted and try to get them to come into the process? Because I think that there's more than double the number of votes. If you take the people who voted, you can double that a little bit more just by getting those people to vote.
Correct. That's part of the strategy at the moment. We are focusing on different groups in that instance, and specifically that group that you refer to now is very important. And we're seeing already results. There are some people, also in the Afrikaner community, who stopped voting in 1994 for various reasons. They are coming back into the system because of the positioning of the party and the message that we carry, that they say, but we want to be part of that. We see this as an option, and we can take things further. So I really think that's going to be the case. And as you correctly point out, I think the DA is the only party that from time to time refers to them being the only this and the only that. I'm always very skeptical about any party that refers to themselves as we are the only this or the only that. Life doesn't work that way.
The Democratic Alliance has had many positions with lines in the sand for the Basic Education Laws Amendment Act, which now, ironically, we had riots in 1976 over the imposition of Afrikaans as the medium of instruction, again in 85, which ultimately led to the change in dispensation was the major reason for it. Plus the end of the Cold War, that you couldn't sustain that threat anymore. So we had that because the imposition of a colonial language. Of course, Afrikaans is not a colonial language; it's an African language. But now Bella is actually imposing a colonial language on all primary school students who show up if they speak Venda or Afrikaans or Swati or Tswana. They have to show up and suddenly speak English, which puts them at a huge disadvantage. And to me, it's not to use that genocide phrase, but it is certainly an effort to exterminate languages. And it's not just Afrikaners that are the victims of this and coloreds. It's all South African kids.
Yes, no, it's terrible, and we continue to put that on the agenda, and it's part of some of the discussions happening at the moment. And in the discussions I did have with the president, we discussed some of these things, and there was an agreement to create an opportunity for a bigger discussion with the Afrikaans community and leadership from the Afrikaner community to address some of these issues. During a speech in Parliament just before then, I did make the point that the Afrikaner has always reached out to the ANC and the black majority and said, we are prepared to assist, we are prepared to help, but it's no longer unconditional. We will do so, but we require equal treatment and recognition of those things that are important to us. Without that, we are not going to assist and we will not cooperate, and we will obviously take things the way that we believe will be in the best interest of all of South Africans.
Well, speaking of equal treatment, and we'll wrap up just after this, but I want you to answer this one first. But speaking of equal treatment, you do have equal treatment under the law. Now, with the Unconstitutional Expropriation Without Compensation Act, you can equally be defrauded of your property by national, provincial, and local authorities. The local council can take your home or take your bucky and doesn't have to explain it to you. That's what the law says. I mean, that's what they say. And that was a major line in the sand for one of the opposition parties, but it's gone kind of quiet. For the Freedom Front Plus, what's your approach been to these things like Bella, NHI, the Employment Equity Act, all these things that are really based on race and they're sad? Are you trying to work quietly behind the scenes, trying to convince the government to make changes? The DA has talked a lot about court cases, but I see no movement. And all these things seem to become part of the fabric of South African life now. And none of them, in my view, are healthy for South Africa.
Oh, they are terrible. And all of those are very strong priorities for the Freedom Front Plus in opposing them and to try them to get them away. For example, the whole question of expropriation is one of the problems from the US in terms of the non-tariff issues, expropriation. The ANC will say, but we are not doing that in fact, in practice, and that's not so easily said. And then the question is, if you're not going to do that, why do you need a law? Why did you change the law and make provision for that? If you're not going to do it in any case, then just take away the law, which they will not do. They are not prepared to do it because they intend to use it. Now, these things remain very high priorities for us. Some of the issues have been in the legal process. For example, expropriation, there's a court case going in terms of the technical procedures, if it was correctly, not about the substance of the law. And it takes a long, long time. We'll see where that goes. But in the meantime, we will continue in terms of getting support from the electorate and also in putting more pressure on government to try and get some sense in their minds in terms of how we deal forward with these things, and where the United States positions themselves with regard to applying pressure is also of huge significance, and it assists a lot.
Well, unfortunately for you and for South Africa is very low on the totem pole of interest for the United States at the moment. Got bigger fish to fry with China, with Gaza, with Iran, with Russia, so it falls very far down there. But Dr. Mulder, let me give you a chance here to just share as we wrap up final thoughts. Anything about the upcoming election or anything from the Freedom Front Plus that you'd like to share with the electorate out there about what you're doing or how you're addressing the concerns of South Africans?
Yes, I honestly believe that South Africa can and should be a success story. There's no reason why we cannot be the giant in Africa, being an economic giant. We've been there, we can go there again, and Afrikaners have played a specific role in making that possible, and to remain committed and to remain possible. But then we need to apply the correct policies. We need to position the country where the economy can grow, where we can have employment, and we can bring unemployment down and create a positive future for all of us in South Africa. And in doing so, there's a new realignment happening in South Africa where the ANC is on the downward trend. The Democratic Alliance has moved right rapidly to the left, trying to be a more social democratic kind of party, going for that market. And let them do so. But I believe there's a huge gap on the political spectrum for a normal Christian conservative approach in South Africa. And those values are the values that we are putting on the table. And I think they align with what is important in terms of Western civilization and what's happening around the world. And I think we can get the necessary support to really make South Africa once again a successful country and an ally to the West where we should be.
Well, with regard, as we wrap up to what you said a few moments ago about these things take time, I'd have a very hard time disputing that. I mean, after all, it took 8 years to get a conviction and sentencing for Julius Malema for an act where he could have maimed or killed someone 8 years ago. In addition, we're still waiting for a trial with Jacob Zuma and the arms deal. Wasn't that trial started about 25 years ago? We're still waiting for that. So you're right. The long, slow arm of justice in South Africa, the wheels can grind very slowly. All right. Dr. Mulder, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it. And also for your comments on the appointment of Roelf Meyer and also on the sentencing of Julius Malema, which I think is of great interest to all South Africans. I want to wish you the best, and we'll chat again soon. Thank you very much. Bye-bye, Donkey.
Bye, Donkey. Thank you for the opportunity. Have a nice day.